Welcome to EPG Pathashala. I am Professor K. Purushottam Reddy, a former professor in political science, Osmania University, and I have been an environmental activist for the last 33 years. As discussed in part 1 of my lecture on environmental protection and sustainable development, we are going to discuss in the part 2 all the initiatives of the UN and individual countries, those initiatives which were actually preparing the world to enter the 21st century on an environment-friendly note. Beginning with the Millennium Development Goals, because these are 8 goals, and these goals focus on, first is the poverty, illiteracy, thirst, child mortality, and then diseases, environmental degradation, women equality or exploitation. These are the major issues. But the 15-year period was given to the nations of the world to address them, but not much progress was really accomplished. United Nations, having taken note of all that, they decided to include some of those provisions which were already given to the world as a mandate, as an agenda, and those goals were included in Sustainable Development Goals. And we have, on 1/1/2016, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals were given to the nations of the world to work and implement. The first 7 of the Sustainable Development Goals, they deal with the essential needs of the poorest of the poor. The next 4 deal with prosperity of the people, and subsequent 4 deal with the protection of the planet Earth. Goal 16th, it deals with peace within a country and between the nations, justice within a country and between the nations, equity within a country and between the nations. And lastly, Goal 17, it deals with partnerships in order to implement very effectively the Sustainable Development Goals. In India, we have, we have gone through the number of environmental issues, the major concerns of the people and the government, the depleting water tables, increasing air pollution, increasing water pollution, deforestation, depletion of biodiversity, the plight of garbage in the cities, and Indian rivers are polluted. We have gone through all those and much more. And here I would like to focus. I have already focused on the role of the judiciary. Constitution of India makes it mandatory for the government to protect the environment, Article 48A. And Article 51A focuses on the duties of the citizens, particularly in the duties, Section G. G deals with protection of environment, and today it is mandatory, it is a must that the citizens of India, they need to play a very positive role. In a democracy, the citizens need to be vigilant. Eternal vigilance is the price we need to pay in a democracy in order to keep it healthy and in order to ensure that democracy works. The Supreme Court of India had developed a concept known as public interest litigation, thanks to Justice Krishna Iyer, and effectively followed up, backed up by Justice Bhagwati, Kuldeep Singh, and Justice Venkatachalaya, and several other judges, and ably supported by, as an advocate, Mr. M.C. Mehta, who has been fighting environmental issues in the Supreme Court and also in the special courts, that is the National Green Tribunal that has been created. Today we have a very eminent judge in the NGT, Justice Swatandra Kumar, who is giving wonderful judgments every day. And all these collectively, plus the global, consensus and which is now reflected in the very many policies of the government of India. I sometimes feel that the whole country is inching towards fulfilling the sustainable development goals. There are certain hurdles, definitely in a very big country like India, will have certain problems. There will be speed breakers, but then we, the people of India, need to overcome, because we need to be conscious of the fact that we are not the last generation to live on this planet Earth. Life has to continue, and therefore we have an obligation towards the coming generations.
Global warming, as the world knows, is resulting in massive climate change. And it's basically because of increasing accumulation of CO2, resulting in increasing trapping of heat, resulting in global warming, and that is affecting the ice near the North Pole and the South Pole, leading to polar melting of the ice, resulting in the rise in the sea level, and that is affecting the island countries and also the coastal cities of the world. Climate change is also affecting agriculture, and it is affecting the rainfall pattern, and it's very difficult. Right now we are not able to, scientific community is unable to really project how the final outcome of the climate change will be. But we all know that the rainfall pattern has been disturbed, and it is going to cost not only India but several countries very, very heavily. The United Nations, having realized the importance and significance of climate change, they have accorded the highest of priority for this problem. And way back in the year 1992 itself, UN at the Rio Summit, at the Earth Summit, they had laid down two major protocols for the nations of the world to read and understand and come to a broad consensus and sign in the sense adopt them and be part of the global change. Those protocols are one on climate change and the other is on the need to protect biodiversity. After that, we come to a stage where on both of these issues, biodiversity and climate change, UN has been organizing the conference of parties in different countries, in different capitals of the world, trying to bring the nations of the world together on a consensus, on a common action plan, and finally, with very innovative techniques. UN, for example, the technique was common but differentiated responsibilities, CBDR. That is, United Nations at the very many global conferences, they ultimately convinced the nations of the world to realize that climate change was a common problem of all the countries of the entire planet Earth, and it also convinced the nations of the world to spell out their action plan, each one according to their capacity, according to their technologies available. They shall, to the extent possible, reduce the emissions which they were generating. This has resulted in a big success, and finally, through a lot of persuasion and understanding, the world came together, and in Paris, 2015 December, a major pact, it is known as the Paris Pact, it is a historic agreement entered into by the nations of the world, and their individual countries have given their consent. Finally, it was a unanimous decision, and every nation indicated to what extent they would be reducing in the next 20 years. And India, on its part, it had indicated that India will reduce its emissions between 33 to 35% by 2030. This reduction is from 2005 levels. That is, whatever India was emitting, as a whole country, the total emissions in 2005, whatever level, from that 33% to 35% will be reduced, which means reduction of a very high percentage. It is a huge reduction, and that calls for change in several policies of Government of India. For example, we need to say no to thermal power. We have to go in for solar power. And we need to, create more forests, because forests are wonderful carbon sinks. And we need to be focusing on mobilizing finance and technology transfer and capacity building. At the same time, we need to focus on clean development mechanisms, and the people of India, not only the government but individual people, every citizen has to make drastic changes in their lifestyles. Every individual has to become environment friendly, people friendly, reduce their individual carbon footprint. And this India promised, and India is the world's largest democracy, a major contributor in terms of pollution. And therefore, on its part, having realized that we were all collectively going in the wrong direction, we are now trying to retrace our major steps. The world as a whole, even as the world was preparing for Paris Accord and, trying to reduce the emission, the United Nations came up with a package of practices, later on fine-tuned. Initially the world had the benefit of Millennium Development Goals, which were implemented between 2000 and 2015. But from 2016 to 2030, the United Nations gave a beautiful program, environment-friendly, low-cost, low-energy emissions. This particular package is known as the Sustainable Development Goals. They have come into effect from 1/1/2016. Already 1.5 years is over, and a lot of changes we are witnessing. Several policies of the government are now being modified because we are now taking into consideration the emissions and the carbon footprint impact. And finally, because we are not functioning in isolation, we are part of a global consensus. And this consensus requires to be implemented in all the countries, and every country is trying to modify their existing policies, fine-tune them, restructure them, come in with new laws and legislation and also institutions. And that is happening, and India is definitely progressing on that front. The Sustainable Development Goals are 17 in number, and each goal has roughly about 10 targets to achieve. The first one is definitely the most important. We need to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. The second is end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. That is to, on one particular target, ending hunger, it is not just as easy. We need to come up with several other policies like food security, improved nutrition, and promoting sustainable agriculture. It means in India that we need to slowly recall the negative damage causing agriculture that was promoted in the name of Green Revolution earlier. So that's going to happen. Even the government of India is slowly promoting organic farming, and I'm sure in the days to come, India will be 100% in favor of sustainable agriculture. Goal 3 focuses on healthy lives and promoting the well-being for all at all ages. Goal 4 focuses on quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities. It's a big thing, and it is here we also, government is connecting, skill development also, vocational education. But the thrust of all human activity in all the countries of the world will be to realize the Sustainable Development Goals. Goal 5 is important because it is here we are talking about the equality of opportunity for men and women. The women have to be taken care of. Exploitation has to be banned completely, and we need to recognize that they are absolutely on an equal footing as men. So child education, it's going to be a top priority not only of India but all the nations of the world. Then we come to ensure sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. This is a thrust area of the government. It's also thrust area of all the countries in the world. So water for all and no water wars will be the slogan in the days to come. Goal number 7, it promises, sustainable modern energy. Here the word modern includes renewability. That is, it shall be clean, it shall be modern, it shall be renewable, and it shall be decentralized. The advantage and the beauty of sustainable energy, particularly solar energy, wind energy, is that you can create this energy even in the middle of a forest. We don't have to lay, those power lines. There is no need to chop the forest for the power lines and all that. So the very technology of manufacturing clean energy is going to be environment friendly. Then goal number 8, it deals with prosperity. It deals with employment opportunity. Every individual must have a decent work, and the dignity of the individual also should be guaranteed. Goal 9, it talks about resilient infrastructure. Goal 10, the focus is reducing inequality within a country and between the countries. Among the nations also, the gap between the rich and the poor nations has to come down. But at the same time, even within a country, we need to reduce the inequalities. Already the world is living in cities. Even in developing countries like India, about 40% plus people are living in the cities. Urban India is growing very fast, and we have to come up with public policies which are going to make the cities safe, resilient and sustainable. Particularly the cities should become livable. Then the goal 12, it deals with sustainable consumption and production patterns. Now this is very important because the rich also, they have to voluntarily restrict their consumption. Just because they are having access to money, they can't be showing off. They need to spend that money with responsibility. This is what the world is expecting. So sustainable consumption and production patterns, because when it comes to consumption of water or electricity, if only 1% or 2% of the population is consuming most of the water and the energy, then that will be to the detriment of the poorest of the poor. That's why the rich have to voluntarily restrict themselves to responsibility, and they should reduce unnecessary consumption. Then we need to climate change, because this is a major issue. Urgent action to combat climate change, that is the need of the hour. Goal number 14, it talks about protecting life in the oceans. We need to ensure the quality of life that is there in the ocean. Then protect the biodiversity not only in the ocean but also on land. Goal 15 deals with sustainably managing the forests, combating desertification and reducing the land degradation and halting biodiversity losses. Goal 16th is one of the most important goals, because it is here we are talking about peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development. Governments of the world, they need to provide access to justice for all and build effective, accountable and inclusive institutions, because there should be rule of law and the supremacy of the constitution needs to be upheld. Unfortunately, in democracies, elected governments, some of these basic issues are diverted, and somehow the political executive, the person at the top, gains priority, which is not a healthy practice. We need to restore the supremacy of law. And lastly, the nations of the world, they need to come together to build partnerships in order to attain sustainable development. Now, having said all this, United Nations, after having achieved so much, they have done some introspection. That is, they started assessing whether the UN was capable of continuing to provide service to the nations of the world, addressing these basic issues. Then they realized that there were a lot of concerns, and these concerns are basically, it was noticed that the nations of the world had entered into several multilateral environmental agreements. That is one major, it is good actually, nations coming together, because that's why we have mentioned about partnerships. So there are so many agreements between individual nations. We call them as the multilateral environmental agreements. That's very good, but we need to take notice all those and keep a track of the very many agreements. Then it was noticed that in the United Nations, because there are so many organizations which have come into being over the period of time, there is a lack of cooperation and coordination among the international organizations, then lack of implementation compliance, inefficient usage of resources. There are too many organizations engaged in environmental governance in too many places located in different nations of the world. For example, Climate Secretariat is administered by the UN Secretariat, whereas the Ozone and Biodiversity Secretariat report to UNEP. And several cities, United Nations offices are spread out in the world, like Montreal, Bonn, Geneva, Nairobi. And it has become increasingly difficult trying to coordinate, to sort out all these, to address these issues. The United Nations has done the homework. Several suggestions have come up. One is the creation of a World Environment Court, because whenever we realize that there are environmental disputes between the nations, then it was felt that there should be a World Environment Court where they can approach. For example, Chernobyl accident or pollution of a river passing through several countries. All these are international conflicts and they need to be addressed. Upgrading the United Nations Trusteeship Council to extend its authority on the global commons, because when it comes to the pollution of the oceans, UN felt that it did not have the mandate to take up that particular issue, and they realized that they need to create new structures. Therefore, from the public policy point of view, in order to be more effective, it was proposed that the UN Trusteeship Council, its power be extended, to include the concern of the global commons like the North Pole and the South Pole and the oceans and the atmosphere and so on. We come to the Security Council because we know Security Council has done a marvelous work when it comes to human rights violations and consequent protection, but it is now expected that the Security Council shall intervene whenever environmental emergencies arise, because disaster management is a big issue and we are not in a position to predict the climate change and its consequences, and therefore to address these issues we need to amend certain provisions of the Security Council to include these concerns as well. Then setting up of a global environmental organization at the UN level. Now when we come to India, we realize that we have a whole lot of problems. The increasing levels of air pollution, and Delhi is a classic example, how unlivable. Sometimes, particularly in winter when there is smog, it becomes increasingly difficult to drive on the roads of Delhi, and the aircraft cannot land in Delhi or take off in Delhi, and that becomes a very serious issue in emergencies. When the country is facing a problem in an emergency, that would be restricting the movements of the presidents and the prime ministers and the chiefs of the armed forces. It's a serious issue to be addressed. In addition to that, this increasing levels of air pollution is affecting the youngsters, the children of Delhi in a big way. Supreme Court has given several directions with policies and strategies. Supreme Court has suggested the shifting of all industries from Delhi, and it has suggested phasing out usage of old diesel cars, and even CNG has been suggested. It's being used in a big way. Things are happening, but we need to scale it up and we need to intensify it. We have the fragile Himalayan ecosystem, which is a major concern. For example, what happened in Uttarakhand is a classic example. Then we have the floods and the drought and industrial pollution. Particularly India, has to be concerned all the more because the world's worst industrial accident occurred in Bhopal in India way back in 1984 December. 4,000 people died, within a span of few hours, and nearly 300,000 people affected in various ways. But what is the big lesson the country have learned? Definitely we have responded to that situation by coming up with new public policy, that is the 1986 Environment Act. But that is not sufficient because justice has not been done to the affected people in Bhopal. They had to suffer. For no fault of them, they suffered. A whole generation was devastated. It's a very serious issue. We should organize our activity in such a way that in future nothing like Bhopal should ever be repeated. But is India really that safe? Then we come to deforestation and vanishing biodiversity. This is a major issue. We used to have 33% of the area under forest in 1950, but that forest cover is decreasing, and today we have hardly about 9%, though the figures of the government indicate 23%. The tree cover is only 9% according to some scientific studies. And much of the biodiversity is vanishing. It's a very serious issue because if this biodiversity is lost, then it affects our food production, it affects our medicine and so many other things. Coming to the polluted rivers of India, every river in this country is polluted. It's not just Ganges. Every river passing through industrial areas and mega cities and towns, all the sewage that is generated is simply reaching the rivers. Then we have the biggest issue of sand mining, export of natural resources. If India being such a big country, if we are exporting natural resources, that means that we are compromising on the needs of the coming generations. That means in this country, development is not sustainable. What happens when all the resources are exhausted? What will be the fate of the coming generations? That is why this subject focuses on equity not only in this generation. We are not only talking about equity within a country, we are talking about equity between the nations and between generations. Our cities are unlivable. Every city in this country, because of unplanned urban growth, we don't have master plans for any of the cities in this country, and all this, and it is pushing Indian cities into disasters. The garbage collection, in spite of the fact that we have policies, but the situation has not improved drastically. There is nothing like a segregation of garbage. It is not collected separately, and garbage is not being, managed the way the Government of India, Ministry of Environment guidelines are. And that is causing immense problem to the people surrounding the garbage. We have the problem of collapsing ecosystems, loss of mangroves, then vanishing public commons in the cities, vanishing lakes, vanishing public spaces, playgrounds, parks. Indian environmental movements, because these are the problems, but then how did the people react? Going back initially, if we are talking about 1731, when the first struggle to protect the environment was launched by the Bishnois, led by Amrita Devi, the attempt was to protect the Khedri trees in Rajasthan. Then we come to the Chipko movement. Chipko is hugging the trees, and this was launched by the Adivasi women led by Gaura Devi, supported by Chandi Prasad Bhatt and subsequently by Sundarlal Boguna and others. A wonderful movement by the women. It is their initiative, the credit goes to them. And with great success, ultimately Chipko symbolizes the attempt of the native to protect its background. Subsequently, we have another struggle, slightly around the same time in Silent Valley, Kerala, where the educated Keralites, they came together and they formed an organization which ultimately, Kerala Shastra Sahitya Parishad, and they did a great job in protecting the Silent Valley, which was full of biodiversity. In Andhra Pradesh, way back in 1987, people came together to stop a nuclear power plant at Nagarjuna Sagar. They wanted to stop it because the siting of the project was just at the entrance of the left canal, and if there were to be an accident, it would become increasingly difficult for anybody to go to the dam and operate the irrigation system. Then we have the famous struggle of Patancheru, where the people, they struggled, they went to the courts, they got 40 orders, a massive attempt on the part of the people, and Supreme Court went to the rescue of the people there, and excellent orders have been issued. And these orders, they are like based on the polluter pays principle, and also one is polluter pays principle and the other is based on the precautionary principle. In Nalgonda district in Andhra Pradesh, people came together and fought for a wonderful struggle, that is to provide water. Because Nalgonda, their own groundwater, they can't drink. If they drink that water, they become fluorosis-stricken. They were fighting because the solution for that is river water, and there is a beautiful river there known as the Krishna River. And that water, people wanted it to be given for drinking purpose. So a Jalasadhana movement was organized, and very eminent people participated, like Professor Shivaji Rao, Dr. Govardhan Reddy, a radiologist, and Susharla Satyanarayana, myself, and several others. We all came together, and finally, I call it, the protest was innovative, and they filed so many nominations that a Lok Sabha election in 1996 had to be postponed because the protest was innovative. That is, struggle need not be violent. It has to be peaceful on Gandhian lines, but at the same time it needs to be innovative, because here the people use the technology of filing nominations in the Lok Sabha elections, and more than 480 nominations were filed, making it impossible for the Election Commission to conduct the election, and that created such a big debate that after the election, the water was lifted. Government was compelled to lift the water from Nagarjuna Sagar backwaters and connect to the canal which was already dug, and thereby 300,000 acres of land got water, and more than 600 villages, habitations got water for drinking. That is, it served water for irrigation and water for drinking purposes. Like this, people throughout the country have been struggling, trying to protect their natural resources, their rivers, their water, and new and innovative struggles are coming up. People are sensitized. Protection of environment is today everybody's duty. Article 51 AG, it says very clearly, yes, the people of India have the duty to protect the environment. Article 48 makes it mandatory for the government to protect the environment. But wherever the government fails or governmental institutions fail, the people are playing a role, and the judiciary is going to the rescue of the poorest of the poor, the people affected by pollution, people affected or displaced in the name of development. The role of the Indian Supreme Court has to be written in letters of gold. Several wonderful judgments have come, and now India is so lucky to have a National Green Tribunal which was created in 2010, and they have been giving extraordinary judgments. And on this issue, wonderful judges like Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice P.N. Bhagwati, both of them are no more, but their contribution, particularly Krishna Iyer's definition of a public interest litigation, he made it very clear that it is a constitutional obligation on the part of the judges to go to the affected people. And we also recognize that M.C. Mehta and his environment friendly and the other advocates, they worked very hard, and recently extraordinary judgments have come. But I would like to add that the right to life as enshrined in the Constitution, Article 21, the meaning has been elaborated, and today right to life means right to wholesome environment. Government of India, under international pressure and also local public pressure, and also being a party to various international protocols, in order to implement and in order to fine-tune the development process in this country to make it environment friendly and also to combat climate change, they have started several missions. One is the National Solar Mission, National Mission for Enhanced Energy Efficiency, Mission for Sustainable Habitat, National Water Mission, National Mission for Himalayan Ecosystems, Mission for a Green India, Mission for a Sustainable Agriculture, and Strategic Knowledge for Climate Change, etc. Now, the Sustainable Development Goals, Government of India has come up very, very clearly. They have launched special programs and special focus, and the attempt is Niti Aayog and several departments in the government, they are coming forward, and I am sure in the days to come, the entire development profile and every human activity in this country will be guided by the basic principles of in order to achieve sustainable development goals. I just would like to recall the very, very famous quotation of Mahatma Gandhi. The earth has enough to meet the needs of all, but not sufficient to satisfy the greed of the few. Environmentalism means a voluntary restraint, a voluntary constraint on the part of the affluent. They need to reduce their emissions, they need to reduce their carbon footprint. You know why? Because they have a role and a responsibility to ensure that even the poorest of the poor, their essential needs are fulfilled. That is why the gap between the rich and the poor needs to be reduced, and we need to focus on equity, which is at the core of the subject of environmentalism.
Now, to conclude the second lecture, in this lecture we have actually gone through the Millennium Development Goals and the Sustainable Development Goals and the attempts of the UN at the global level to combat climate change and all that. We have, in the later part of the lecture, I have tried to focus on the emerging environmental crisis that is there in India, because we have so many problems and people are suffering, they are being marginalized, displaced, dispossessed, and they are suffering because of increasing levels of air and water pollution. And there we see that the Supreme Court of India has gone. They have taken up, they have created new structures and new initiatives, particularly the concept of public interest litigation is nothing but an attempt of the Supreme Court to provide relief to the poorest of the poor. Then we come to, it has not only not satisfied with that, they created the National Green Tribunal and they are trying to give several landmark judgments, particularly the judgment which are focusing on the polluter pays principle and the precautionary principle. The Supreme Court is doing its job, but as citizens, it is we the people who need to be vigilant, and we are empowered by a provision in the Constitution which says, Article 51 AG, it enjoins the people of India to do their job. That is, we need to be vigilant and we need to play our role in order to protect the environment and the people in this country. Government also has a duty to perform under Article 48A, but collectively, both the government and the citizens in this country, we should, come out of our shells and play the role which is expected of the people of the world's largest democracy, because we have a definite role to play. Unless India plays its part, the global issues cannot be addressed. And thank you very much.